saw Flora looking out her window as Mrs. Tickum is holding on to her vacuum cleaner that is heading straight for a squirrel. And you can notice on the desk there that Flora has 2 comic books, The Illuminated Adventures of the Amazing Incandesto, and there's another one right next to it that says Terrible Things Can Happen to You. So those are the comics that she reads. And she's wishing that Alfred T. Slipper was there to help with this situation. Unfortunately, Alfred T. Slipper wasn't present. Where was Incandesto when you needed him? Not that Flora really believed in superheroes, but still. She stood at the window and watched as the squirrel was vacuumed up. Poof! Thwomp! Holy bagumba, said Flora. Chapter 2. The Mind of a Squirrel. Not much goes on in the mind of a squirrel. Huge portions of what is loosely termed the squirrel brain are given over to one thought: food. The average squirrel cogitation goes something like this: I wonder what there is to eat. This thought is then repeated with small variations. Things like, where's the food? Man, I am hungry. Is that a piece of food? And are there more pieces of food? Some 6,000 or 7,000 times a day. All of this is to say that when the squirrel in the Tickums' backyard got swallowed up by the Ulysses 2000X, there weren't a lot of terribly profound things going through his head. As the vacuum cleaner roared toward him, he did not, for instance, think, here, at last, is my fate come to meet me. He did not think, oh, please, give me one more chance and I will be good. What he thought was, man, sure I'm hungry. And then there was a terrible roar, and he was sucked right off his feet. At that point, there were no thoughts in his squirrel head, not even thoughts of food. Chapter 3. The Death of a Squirrel. Seemingly, swallowing a squirrel was a bit much, even for the powerful, indomitable, indoor-outdoor Ulysses 2000X. Mrs. Tickums' birthday machine let out an uncertain roar and stuttered to a stop. Mrs. Tickum bent over and looked down at the vacuum cleaner. There was a tail sticking out of it. For heaven's sake, said Mrs. Tickum, what next? She dropped to her knees and gave the tail a tentative tug. She stood. She looked around the yard. Help, she said. I think I've killed a squirrel. Chapter 4. A surprisingly helpful cynic. Flora ran from her room. She ran down the stairs. As she ran, she thought, for a cynic, I am a surprisingly helpful person. She went out the back door. Her mother called to her. She said, where are you going, Flora Belle? Flora didn't answer her. She never answered her mother when she called her Flora Belle. Sometimes she didn't answer her mother when she called her Flora either. Flora ran through the tall grass and cleared the fence between her yard and the Tickums in a single bound. Move out of the way, said Flora. She gave Mrs. Tickum a shove and grabbed hold of the vacuum cleaner. It was heavy. She picked it up and shook it. Nothing happened. She shook harder. The squirrel dropped out of the vacuum cleaner and landed with a plop on the grass. He didn't look that great. He was missing a lot of fur vacuumed off, Flora assumed. His eyes fluttered. His chest rose and fell and rose again. And then it stopped moving altogether. Flora knelt. She put a finger on the squirrel's chest. Oh my. She's going to do CPR on the squirrel. At the back of each issue of the Illuminated Adventures of the Amazing Incandesto, there was a series of bonus comics. One of Flora's very favorite bonus comics was entitled Terrible Things Can Happen to You. As a cynic, Flora found it wise to be prepared. Who knew what horrible, unpredictable things could happen next, or would happen next? Terrible Things Can Happen to You detailed what action to take if you inadvertently consumed plastic fruit. This happened more often than you would suppose. Some plastic fruit was extremely realistic looking. How to perform the Heimlich maneuver on your elderly Aunt Edith if she choked on a stringy piece of steak at an all-you-can-eat buffet. What to do if you were wearing a striped shirt and a swarm of locusts descended. Run. Locusts eat stripes. And of course, how to administer everyone's favorite life-saving technique, CPR. Terrible Things Can Happen to You did not, however, detail exactly how someone was supposed to give CPR to a squirrel. I'll figure it out, said Flora. What will you figure out? Said Mrs. Tickum. Flora didn't answer her. Instead, she bent down and put her mouth on the squirrel's mouth. It tasted funny. If she were forced to describe it, she would say that it tasted exactly like squirrel. Fuzzy, damp, slightly nutty. Have you lost your mind? Said Mrs. Tickum. Flora ignored her. She breathed into the squirrel's mouth. She pushed down on his small chest. She started to count. We'll have to find out what happens next in Chapter 5, The Squirrel Obliges.